The town of Cresthaven was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and large enough that secrets still managed to find dark corners to hide in. It was the kind of place where the baker knew your order before you walked through the door, where children played in the streets until the streetlights came on, and where a stranger arriving in town was noticed within the hour. So when Damien Wolfe moved into the old stone house at the edge of town, Cresthaven noticed him immediately. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, when the leaves were burning red and gold, and the air carried the first real cold of the season. He came alone, in a dark truck with no music playing, and he carried his boxes inside without asking anyone for help. He did not wave. He did not smile. He simply moved from the truck to the house and back again, over and over, until the last box was inside and the door closed behind him. That was the beginning of the story that Cresthaven told itself about Damien Wolfe. He was enormous. That was the first thing anyone said about him. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that filled a doorway, and hands that looked like they could break things without trying. His face was not soft. It carried the kind of lines that come not from age, but from weather, and from years of holding an expression very still. A long scar ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, pale against his dark skin, and it made people look twice and then look away quickly, as if seeing it was somehow rude. He did not come to the town meetings. He did not shop at the Saturday market. He bought his groceries in the early morning, before most people were awake, and he paid in cash and said thank you, and nothing else. He walked the outer roads of town in the evenings, always alone, always at the same hour. And people who saw him on those walks would cross to the other side of the road without quite understanding why. The rumors started the way rumors always do, slowly at first, and then all at once. Someone said he had been in prison. Someone else said no, it was the military, and that he had done things overseas that he was not allowed to talk about. A woman at the hair salon said her cousin in the next town had heard his name connected to something terrible, though she could not say exactly what. A man at the bar said he had seen Damien standing at the edge of the woods late at night, just standing there, staring at nothing. The story grew each time it was repeated, as stories do, until Damien Wolfe had become, in the imagination of Cresthaven, something closer to a legend than a man. They called him the monster, not to his face, never to his face, but in kitchens and coffee shops and school hallways and anywhere two people stood close enough to whisper, the name followed him like a shadow. There was one person in Cresthaven who did not whisper. Her name was Sophia Reyes. She was 32 years old, a schoolteacher who had grown up in Cresthaven and returned to it after a few years in the city, and she had a quality that was rare in small towns. She paid attention to what she actually saw, rather than to what she was told to see. She had noticed Damien the way she noticed most things, carefully, without rushing to a conclusion. What she actually saw was this. She saw him, one afternoon in November, crouched down beside old Mrs. Hollis's cat, which had gotten itself stuck beneath a fence post. He worked the animal free with enormous, careful hands, taking his time, and when the cat was loose, he set it down gently and watched it walk away. He did not look around to see if anyone had noticed. He stood, dusted his knees, and continued walking. She saw him, one evening in December, place a bag of groceries on the doorstep of the Anderson family, who had lost their income when the father lost his job. He rang the bell and walked away before the door opened. He did not leave a note. She saw him, one cold morning in January, stand between a group of older boys who were surrounding a younger child on the school road, and do nothing except stand there. He did not raise his voice. He did not move toward them. He simply existed in the space, large and immovable as a stone wall, until the older boys looked at each other and decided they had somewhere else to be. Then he watched the younger child walk safely away, turned, and continued on his own path. Sophia watched all of these things and said nothing, because she understood that some truths need time before they are ready to be spoken. The person who had no interest in waiting for truth was a man named Gerald Vance. Gerald Vance was the kind of man who had been the loudest person in every room he had ever entered. He had money, enough of it anyway, and a long history in Cresthaven, and he had built a version of himself over many years that depended on being the one that other people looked to. He organized the town events. He sat on every committee. He was the first to speak at meetings and the last to sit down. He believed, in the deep and unexamined way that some people believe things, that he was Cresthaven's most important person. Damien Wolfe's presence irritated him in a way he could not name, but also could not ignore. It was the way a large, quiet animal irritates a smaller, noisier one. Not through any action, but simply through being. Damien had never once looked at Gerald Vance the way Gerald Vance felt he deserved to be looked at. He had never asked for anything, never approached him, never acknowledged the invisible rankings that Vance had spent a lifetime constructing. So Gerald Vance did what men like him always do when they feel overlooked. He decided to make himself impossible to overlook. At the February town meeting, a monthly gathering in the old community hall where Cresthaven discussed local matters over coffee and folding chairs, Vance stood up and said what many people had been thinking, but had not been willing to say aloud. He said that Cresthaven was a family community, a safe place, a town with values, and that the presence of certain individuals was causing concern among residents. He did not say Damien's name at first. He did not have to. Every person in that hall knew exactly who he meant. He listed the rumors as if they were facts. He used words like dangerous and unknown background and threatening presence. He spoke for several minutes, and as he spoke, he watched the room nod with him, and the nodding made him bolder. By the end, he had said Damien's name directly, and he had suggested, with a politician's careful phrasing, that perhaps some people were simply not suited to community life. The hall was quiet when he sat down. Then people began to murmur, which is the sound a crowd makes when it is almost ready to agree with something it is not sure it should agree with. From the back of the hall, a chair scraped the floor. Elder Marcus Webb, who was 74 years old and had lived in Cresthaven his entire life, stood up slowly. He was not a tall man, and he was not a loud man, but when he spoke, people listened, because he had earned that kind of silence over many decades. "I have something to say," Marcus said, "and I am going to ask you all to listen completely before you decide what to think." He told them about Damien Wolfe, not the version they had built in whispers and hair salons and bars. The real version. Damien had grown up in a city 3 hours away, in a neighborhood where safety was never guaranteed. He had raised himself largely, with a mother who worked double shifts and a father who was not present, and he had learned early that the world was divided into people who waited for someone else to protect them and people who decided to do it themselves. He had chosen the second path, at an age when most children were still thinking about games. He had worked in community protection for 15 years. Not as a public figure, nothing with a title, or a badge or a ceremony. He worked in the places the official structures did not reach, in the gaps between what the law could do and what communities actually needed. He had dismantled 2 trafficking networks operating in small towns. He had removed 3 individuals whose activities had been putting families at risk. He had done all of it quietly, at personal cost, without recognition, and without ever once asking anyone to thank him. He had come to Cresthaven because there was something here that needed watching. Something that had not yet shown its face, but was moving in the direction of this town. He had asked Marcus, who was an old family friend, not to tell anyone until the time was right. He knew how he looked. He knew what people saw when they saw him. He had stopped trying to change that a long time ago, because the appearance that made people afraid of him also made other, more dangerous people underestimate him, and that was a tool he could not afford to give up. Marcus looked out at the hall of faces. "The man you've been calling a monster," he said, "has been standing between this town and something that would have hurt you. And he has been doing it without asking for a single thing in return." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one that had followed Vance's speech. That one had been the silence of a crowd almost ready to move in a direction. This one was the silence of a crowd that had just been asked to stop moving entirely and look at where it was standing. Sophia, sitting near the window, felt something unlock in her chest. She thought of all the small things she had seen and filed away. The cat, the groceries on the doorstep, the boys on the school road, who had decided to leave because a large, quiet man had chosen to be present. She had known, without being able to say it, that the story she was watching was not the story the town was telling. Now the 2 stories had finally, in this ordinary hall on a February evening, become one. Gerald Vance sat very still in his chair. His face had gone through several expressions quickly: surprise, embarrassment, and then something smaller and harder, which was the expression of a man recalculating. He said nothing. For perhaps the first time in many years, he had nothing to say. 3 days later, what Marcus had warned about arrived. It came in the form of 4 men who drove into Cresthaven on a Thursday afternoon and began asking questions about a family who lived on the east side of town. The family had left a difficult situation behind them when they moved to Cresthaven a year earlier, and someone, somewhere, had eventually found the thread that led here. The 4 men were polite on the surface, the way dangerous things sometimes are before they stop needing to be. Damien knew they were coming before they arrived. He had been watching for exactly this. What happened next was not dramatic in the way that stories sometimes make these things dramatic. There were no long confrontations, no speeches, no moments designed for an audience. Damien made 3 phone calls to people who knew how to handle the official side of things. He then positioned himself very visibly outside the family's home, and he waited. When the 4 men came down the street and saw him standing there, all 6 feet and several inches of him, completely still, completely calm, they slowed. They had a conversation among themselves, too quiet to hear. Then they got back in their vehicle and left. They did not return. The family never knew how close the threat had come. They thanked Damien for being in the neighborhood, not understanding what his being there had meant. He said they were welcome, and meant it simply. The town of Cresthaven had a strange few weeks after that. People were working something out, slowly, the way you work out a problem that requires you to admit you were wrong. It is uncomfortable work. It does not happen all at once. But it happens. People began to see the things that had always been there. Neighbors remembered small moments, a hand that held a door, a presence that had made them feel safer without being able to say why, a figure on the evening road who had always walked the boundaries of the town as if checking that they held. These memories had been there all along. They had simply been colored by the name the town had given him. The monster. Spoken in whispers. How strange it seemed now. Sophia crossed paths with Damien one morning in late February, on the road by the old mill. She had been thinking for days about what to say, and in the end, she said the simplest thing, because the simplest things are usually the truest. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what the town said, for what we assumed." He looked at her for a moment. Up close, his face was less intimidating than it was tired. The face of someone who had been carrying weight for a long time, and had become very good at not showing it. "People see what they expect to see," he said. "That's just how it works." "It's not how it should work," she said. He considered that. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." They stood there for a moment, in the cold February morning, with the mill wheel still and the river moving slowly beneath it. And it was the kind of moment that does not need to be made bigger than it is. What changed in Cresthaven after that was not dramatic either. Towns do not change the way stories change, in clean turns and clear moments. They change the way people change, gradually and imperfectly, with old habits showing up at inconvenient times, and new understandings settling in around them. But something did shift. People stopped crossing the road. The man at the market, who had always handed Damien his change without making eye contact, began to make eye contact. Children who had been told, in indirect parental ways, to stay away from the big scary man at the edge of town, began to simply see a man at the edge of town. Gerald Vance was quieter at meetings. Not silent, but quieter, which for him was a considerable change. And every evening, as the light faded over Cresthaven, Damien Wolfe walked the outer roads of the town. He walked the same paths he had always walked, at the same hour, with the same quiet attention. He checked that things were as they should be. He noted what was different from the evening before. He carried, in his large and steady hands, a responsibility that no one had given him, and no one could take away, because it was not the kind of responsibility that lives in titles or ceremonies. It lives in character, in choice, in doing the thing that needs doing, without waiting to be asked, or thanked, or understood. The people of Cresthaven, over time, came to understand something that most communities never learn. That the person who looks the most different from what they imagine safety to look like is sometimes the very thing keeping them safe. That fear, unchecked, tells terrible lies. That the man they had built into a monster in their imaginations had, in reality, been their quiet and unasked guardian the whole time. He was not a monster. He had never been a monster. He was something far harder to make room for in a small town's imagination. He was a man of genuine and silent strength, who had chosen, over and over again, to spend that strength on people who did not know they needed him. That is rarer than it sounds, and it is worth more than most people will ever stop to calculate. Cresthaven was lucky, in the end. Not many towns get to find out what they almost lost before they lose it. Damien Wolfe continued to live in the old stone house at the edge of town. The lights came on in the evenings. Smoke rose from the chimney in winter. And if you drove past on a clear night, you might see him on the road, walking the line of the town in the dark, steady and unhurried, watching over people who were, at last, no longer afraid to wave back.